My name is Reverend Dr. Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, September 18th, 2025, 713 days since October 7th of 2023. And essentially, there is significant news this week, some of which hasn't changed in terms of the devastation and atrocities in Gaza and has changed in terms of the severity. The ground invasion of Gaza City has officially begun. It feels like we're going in cycles because we had ground invasions, last year, a year ago plus, and here we are again. Gaza City, one of the largest cities in Gaza where people had been displaced in the fall of 2023 to the south, then they relocated back to the north and they're being displaced yet again. And Tuesday satellite imagery captured Israeli armored vehicles that were gathered around all sides of the city. On Tuesday, that's the day the ground offensive officially began. Netanyahu confirmed this during a hearing in his corruption trial. Palestine's foreign ministry called for urgent international intervention to protect civilians in Gaza City. According to the Israeli military's estimates, there are 3,000 Hamas militants remaining in the city that comprise less than 1% of the population. And one of the things that we've seen over the past 2 years of war and ethnic cleansing and what an increasing number of people are calling genocide is that when there is any potential presence of a militant, it often justifies, in the eyes of the Israeli military and the establishment, the killing of literally hundreds of Palestinians in Gaza. And we fear the reports that are coming out of, what the effects of this ground invasion will be. The military announced on Sunday that it had struck multiple high-rise buildings in Gaza City. This was an acceleration of the assault leading to the ground invasion. The area is incredibly metropolitan, what's left of it. Hospital officials in Gaza said that the Israeli strikes killed more than 130 Palestinians between Saturday and Sunday. I believe that was more than a 24-hour period of time. Yesterday, on Wednesday, the Israeli army pushed deeper into the city. This was the second day of the ground offensive. According to hospital officials, overnight strikes killed at least 16 people. More than half of the deaths were in Gaza City. There were multiple airstrikes on a hospital that's called the Rantisi Hospital for Children in Gaza City. Reports indicated that the IDF bombed the Rantisi Children's Hospital Tuesday night, and at least 40 patients that were left there were forced to flee. Yesterday, on Wednesday, there were 98 Palestinians killed, 385 wounded, and those numbers are minimum numbers. That is in a 24-hour period of time. 4 people during that time died from starvation and malnutrition. On Tuesday, strikes killed 38 people in the intensified offensive. Most of the deaths, again, were in Gaza City. On Saturday, 47 Gazans were killed. Saturday's death toll included 12 children. The Gaza Health Ministry has said that the Israeli Defense Forces is blocking the World Health Organization from allowing fuel to reach hospitals. The hospitals are essentially non-functioning, and what is functioning of them is operated by generators. There are inadequate supplies. I mean, the reports we hear from physicians who have served there are abhorrent. One doctor said it's the worst conditions he's seen in wartime in his entire life. And he's considered, one of the foremost experts who goes into some of the worst conflict zones around the world. The IDF warned Palestinians on Wednesday to leave through an exit called Saladin Road. The IDF warned that people have 48 hours to evacuate. And I just want to remind people what this means. It means when there's an evacuation order that residents have to take the specific routes that are designated by the IDF. If they don't take those specific routes, they're considered enemy combatants and they're killed just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Under these circumstances, all of Gaza has become unsafe. And essentially it means that people are in the wrong place. Haaretz had an article yesterday that described the invasion of Gaza, and I just wanted to take a moment to read. The so-called evacuation of civilians is a trail of bombs and death. Gaza is being wiped off the map, stone by stone. Words are losing their meaning and can no longer convey what's happening, one resident wrote. I sent my family south, a friend texted me yesterday morning, but I stayed in Gaza City to say goodbye to its streets and to mourn it. I'm sitting alone in my father's house, thinking about the city's few landmarks that are still standing. I don't know what I will do tomorrow. Will my longing for my family prevail, and then I will head south too? Or will I have the courage to stay until my blood, bones, and flesh are mixed with the dust and ash of Gaza as it is erased from the world, stone by stone? Several aid groups operating in Gaza City have suspended or greatly curtailed what remains of their operations in the city. We heard this specifically from groups like ANERA, the American Near East Refugee Aid Agency. They have been a CMEP partner over the years. We have great respect for them and their CEO, Sean Carroll. They're talking about how their work has been stymied because of the ongoing attacks and bombing. It's no longer safe for them to be able to deliver humanitarian assistance. The Israeli military on Wednesday claimed that 350,000 Gaza City residents had evacuated from the city. That was roughly just more than half of those who had relocated back to the north. Israel has said they're making efforts to open routes to facilitate a quicker evacuation. Gaza City residents are describing the airstrikes that have been happening overnight as pure hell. Separately, Tess Ingram, a UNICEF spokesperson, said it is inhumane to expect nearly half a million children to evacuate to coastal refugee camps that are unsafe, overcrowded, and ill-equipped to receive them. Conditions are so bad and overcrowding in these humanitarian camps that displaced Palestinians on the Gaza coast are so desperate. Some people who fled the offensive in the past week or two from Gaza City have said they're now headed back to Gaza City because the conditions in the camps have no safe place for shelter. This is a direct quote. Few tents, inadequate water supplies, and restricted healthcare. More than 10% of Palestinians living in Gaza have been killed or injured since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. Guess where that statistic comes from? It comes from the former chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces. That's Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi. He said this last week. He said that more than 200,000 people have been injured or killed in Gaza. These numbers directly correlate with the numbers we receive from the health ministry in Gaza that is currently run by Hamas. If there is a question about the death toll, he literally is the person who led the military in the first year plus of the war. Meanwhile, the finance minister in Israel, Smotrich, said that Gaza Strip has become a real estate bonanza, that negotiations have begun with the United States for a business plan. I just read, and didn't put this in my update today, that Tony Blair and that whole plan that came forward to the White House is looking for buyers, if you will, people who will buy in to the whole rebuilding plan that Tony Blair has been working on. I'll talk more about that in days ahead. The United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry of the occupied Palestinian territories said there's reasonable grounds to conclude that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. A new report was just published on Tuesday. It cites statements by Israeli leaders, patterns of conduct by Israeli forces as evidence of genocidal intent. This singles out the former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, the Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Herzog for inciting genocide. Israel's foreign ministry said it categorically rejects that report. There are virtually no updates on ceasefire negotiations. Marco Rubio, our U.S. Secretary of State, said time is running out for negotiations to end the war. He was in Israel and Qatar this week. In the occupied West Bank, there are reports that Israeli soldiers clashed with militants in Nablus this past week. A border police officer, Israeli border police, killed a man in East Jerusalem who attempted to cross the separation barrier. The border police said they shot the man as he attempted to cross. The Red Crescent confirmed he was killed in the incident. Masked Israeli settlers set fire to buildings in the Bedouin village of Jabba in the West Bank. Police said that there would be an investigation. This is the second week in a row that settlers set fire to buildings in the West Bank Palestinian Bedouin community of Jabba. This is east of Ramallah, northeast of occupied East Jerusalem. Oscar-winning Palestinian, this is the Oscar-winning director Basil Adra, has said that Israeli soldiers conducted a raid in his West Bank home. They searched him. They went through his wife's phone. Israeli settlers attacked his village. Following that, on Saturday, 2 of his brothers were injured, as was one of his cousins. He went with them to the hospital, and when that happened, he heard from his family that 9 Israeli soldiers had stormed his home. If this is not a direct response to people speaking out, I don't need to claim intent, just to tell you what's been happening as that video. And talk about what's happening in Israel proper. A spokesperson for the IDF said that the army chief has the responsibility to speak truth amid his opposition to the Gaza offensive. So the current head of the Israeli Defense Forces opposes the offensive that's happening in Gaza City. He's been outspoken about it. There have been leaks from some of Netanyahu's cabinet meetings, which Netanyahu is very upset about. I want us to talk about this for a minute. You know, the head of the IDF says it's going to cost too much money. They don't have the human resources. They don't have other resources. And he also says it will cause devastation to the Palestinian people. This is literally the head of the Israeli military. Hostages' families have determined that they are going to remain in protest outside of Netanyahu's residence. About 200 protesters went there. One of the fathers of a hostage who was killed on October 7th, whose body is still held in Gaza, is calling on Netanyahu's wife, Sarah, come explain to us how you sleep at night when I have not been able to sleep for the past 2 years. We are here to stay, he said. So I wanted to just go into a little bit, sorry, I'm back and forth a bit, but this is on the internal battle with this IDF chief. He argued with lawmakers about the Gaza ceasefire efforts and said, why are you not doing more to negotiate a solution to this? So this is the chief of staff, Ayil Zamir. He criticized Israeli leaders over their lack of progress in ceasefire negotiations. This happened on Sunday night. According to Israeli News Channel 13, Zamir was arguing with lawmakers saying, I'm preparing the military for an operation. I'm recruiting reservists to defeat Hamas as you instructed, which he, didn't buy into that plan. He said, why isn't the negotiating team traveling all over the world to formulate a proposal? Why is the Mossad chief Barnea sitting here? Why are you in Israel? Go force a deal. And according to reports, Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, who heads the ceasefire negotiating team, responded reportedly by pointing to Zamir and highlighting his past mistakes, saying, you stood here and said the U.S. would not fight with us on Iran. In other words, you were wrong. In the end, everything happened contrary to what you said, contrary to your assessments. Dermer said there's a deal on the table now, and it's only there because we did not listen to you. And the chief of staff said, in response to Dermer, then you, referring to Israel, take the offer. So there are battles going on inside of the very decision makers in Israel who have the power to bring about a ceasefire or not. According to a political source, Netanyahu during the meeting was furious about leaks, which he said endanger combat soldiers and hostages. Meanwhile, in Israel, 8 ultra-Orthodox draft dodgers were arrested at the Tel Aviv airport on their way to Ukraine. Qatar, there's been a lot of conversation since Israel attacked Qatar in the past week or so. A senior Hamas official made a public appearance, Ghazi Hamad. He's a member of the negotiating team for Hamas. He did a news interview this week showing that the Israeli attack was not successful. Prior to the Doha attack, Israel's external intelligence agency, the Mossad, was considering a ground operation in Qatar that would kill senior Hamas leaders, but they had significant concerns about that attack. The Mossad's refusal to conduct that ground operation was a part of what influenced why and how these strikes were carried out by Israel on Qatar, on Doha, on the Hamas headquarters there. While initial reports from the White House said that the U.S. did not know these attacks were going to happen in enough time to be able to give Qatar warning, there were other reports this week that totally contradicted that. The Wall Street Journal said the U.S. and Trump and the administration found out so close to the actual launching of the missiles, there was no way for them to halt the order. But Axios had a report that disagreed. Qatar on Monday hosted an emergency summit of Arab and Islamic heads of state. This was in response to Israel's attack on Doha. A draft resolution that was reviewed by Reuters condemned what was described as Israel's genocide, ethnic cleansing, starvation, siege, and colonizing activities and expanded policies. It said that Qatar is going to respond to that attack. That meeting, in part, was to determine what that response would be. There's been no public reporting on what that might look like. Netanyahu spoke to President Trump in advance. I mentioned the Axios report already, so there were contradictions between what Netanyahu said and Trump said. News said they talked, they both said that they didn't, et cetera, et cetera. On Monday, Qatar and the United States are on the verge of finalizing an enhanced defense cooperation agreement. So says Marco Rubio. I've not read further reports of his time in Qatar. And then there also were attacks by Israel in Lebanon. 2 people were killed in a drone strike, specifically in the Al Asira neighborhood. This is in the Bekaa Valley in Baalbek. Baalbek is east of the Litani River in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. It's about 42 miles northeast of Beirut. And on Monday, locals reported that 7 people were wounded after the Israeli Defense Forces struck a command center of Hezbollah in Nabatea in the south of Lebanon. And the IDF also confirmed an additional separate strike that targeted Hezbollah militants in South Lebanon's Ataroun. There have been updates regarding Syria. Israel delivered military supplies to Druze in Syria. This was in response to the escalations in Suwaida in the south of Syria. Druze fighters spoke anonymously, reporting this to the news, that Israel was helping to unify splintered Druze factions and had delivered military supplies to them, guns and ammunition. The 2 Druze commanders and a Western intelligence source said that Israel is paying the salaries of Druze fighters in South Syria. There are believed to be about 3,000 of them there. Under U.S. pressure, Syria is speeding up talks with Israel on a security pact. This would be a security pact between Syria and Israel. Damascus hopes that this will roll back Israel's recent land seizures. Israel has taken over land that is either contested land or land that belongs to Syria. The pact would not be a full peace treaty. An Israeli source said the U.S. is pressuring Syria about this. Syria said that's not true. Syria specifically said they have not experienced U.S. pressure about this. Yesterday, Ron Dermer, again, Strategic Affairs Minister in Israel, and the Syrian Foreign Minister al-Shabani and the U.S. envoy Tom Barak were supposed to meet in London to talk about the security agreement. I don't know what happened in that, but I know that the proposal from Israel asks Syria to agree to a demilitarized zone and where there would be a no-fly zone on Syrian territory. Syria has said they're not interested in that. The President Shara said that talks with Israel could yield results in coming days. He described the security pact as a necessity, but it has to respect Syria's airspace and territorial unity. Shara added that there was no pressure on Damascus from Washington. Now, it's important to understand when you look at the geopolitics of the Middle East, you have the atrocities and crisis in Gaza, you have the internal struggle between people who are Israeli and they're protesting the war and the Hostages Families Forum. And then you have inside of the Israeli Security Cabinet, the battles I just talked to you about what should happen here. You have Qatar that's playing a mediator that was just attacked by Israel. And in the meantime, we talked about this last week, in a period of 72 hours, Israel had attacked 6 different countries: South Lebanon, Syria. I tried to go through them last week and couldn't come up with the 6, but I give these updates regularly. The geopolitics of the Middle East right now are in disarray. The crisis in Gaza has to be brought to an end because of what's happening to the civilian population of Gaza, because of the violation of human rights, because it's in the best interest of the people of Israel, but also because the broader geopolitics of the Middle East, God forbid that they escalate further. Israel struck Yemen. That's one of the 6 countries that I mentioned. The Houthis are in control there. They are not acknowledged as a legitimate government. They are considered a terrorist group by the U.S. and many. Israel struck their main port in their capital city at least 12 times this past week. And on Tuesday, a missile was launched from Yemen that triggered sirens in Jerusalem in response to those strikes on the Hodeidah port. International news: the UN General Assembly endorsed a 2-state proposal to end the war in Gaza on Friday. So that was endorsed by the UN General Assembly. They also voted, the UNGA, on Friday, 142-10, to endorse a declaration outlining tangible, time-bound, and irreversible steps. This was specifically towards that 2-state solution. This was ahead of the September 22nd meeting, during which the UK, France, Canada, Australia, and Belgium are expected to formally recognize a Palestinian state. Britain will recognize a Palestinian state this weekend. President Trump is apparently visiting in London. I have not read a lot about that, but it said that the UK wanted the announcement to happen after Trump's visit. Prime Minister Starmer announced that this will be happening. You'll recall that the UK only said they would recognize a state if Israel did not reverse the atrocities in Gaza. which obviously they have not yet done. On Tuesday, several European countries condemned Israel's launch of the ground offensive, calling it utterly reckless and appalling. The UK foreign minister said. Germany's foreign minister, Wadapul, said that Israel is on the wrong path. The European Commission is proposing altering free trade agreements with Israel. We are starting to see movements towards economic action and sanctions. They've not been approved yet, but this is over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. There is also a sanctioning of far-right ministers. We talked last week about Smotrich and Ben-Gvir becoming persona non grata because one of the EU nations declared them such, which means they are not allowed to travel to the EU. The EU foreign policy chief has said sanctions on Israel would send a clear signal that the EU demands an end to the war. So this is the foreign minister, Chaya Kallas of the EU, said Israel's ground offensive has made an already desperate situation even worse. It will mean more death, more destruction, and more displacement. That woman, the foreign minister, is also the high representative for foreign affairs and security policy, Chaya Kallas. Wednesday, she announced a proposal for the bloc to downgrade trade ties with Israel. In the US, I'm almost finished with the update for today, so thank you. I know there's a lot to share. Israel and Saudi Arabia may soon normalize relations, so says the US hostage envoy, Adam Boehler. He says they will eventually normalize. This is a little bit surprising that he's reporting this because the UAE just said their normalization that already happened is being threatened because the Knesset in Israel voted to annex the West Bank. And the UAE said if that happens, the normalization agreement, that's a red line. Rubio has been in Qatar, as I mentioned. I'll talk about that more in the week ahead. There's been a lot of conversation about the killing of Charlie Kirk, the conservative political activist. Many claim he was at the center of the MAGA movement. Tucker Carlson implied this week that Netanyahu's comments about his death were disgusting. Jimmy Kimmel's show was canceled because he made the claim that Charlie Kirk was, at the center of the MAGA movement. This is specifically relevant to the Middle East because Charlie Kirk had very strong ideas about Israel. Vice President Vance seemed to defend Israeli leaders' reactions to the far-right activist's death while he hosted the late pundit's talk radio show on Monday. Tucker Carlson was a guest on the Charlie Kirk show and seemed to criticize Prime Minister Netanyahu's response. He said, it's not helpful for foreign heads of state to jump in and say he lived for my cause or whatever. It's disgusting, actually. Don't do that. That turns everyone off. You don't help your own cause, and it's literally untrue. I wanted to close with just a few updates from CMEP and the Christian community. The Church at the Crossroads gathering happened this past week. Praise God. It sounds like it was profoundly successful, a sold-out audience. I shared brief remarks via video. I was not able to attend for health reasons. But Palestinian Christians led the conference and asked fellow believers to stand against the war in Gaza. I'd encourage you to look at the Church at the Crossroads conference. Specifically, there is a statement that is really profound and beautiful that came out that's asking for endorsements. It's a declaration. I believe 100 of us were initial signatories to that statement. We're now looking for more people to join in. It's calling for the support of an end to the atrocities, to the war. The coalition that signed it is pastors, theologians, scholars, and activists. And again, that is the declaration coming out of the Church at the Crossroads. The crux of the letter said this: our siblings lament that our response to this war compromises our witness to Jesus's gospel and harms the unity of the body. The letter states they cry out, this is speaking specifically for Palestinian Christians, but for all of us, for an immediate ceasefire, return of all Israeli and Palestinian hostages. That's referring specifically to Palestinian prisoners who are held unjustly in prison, and the Israeli hostages in Gaza, unimpeded entry of aid to Gaza, and accountability for Israel's unjust actions. Two other updates. We launched the Armenian Advisory Council this week. CMEP works significantly on Armenia, the oldest Christian country in the world. We focus specifically on the ongoing Nagorno-Karabakh conflict related to Artsakh, where 100,000 to 200,000 Armenian Christians were displaced in September 2023. We work with the Armenian community throughout the Middle East, including the Old City of Jerusalem. One of the quarters of the Old City of Jerusalem is under threat even right now. And so we launched that council in New York City the last couple of days, which was quite significant. Finally, we have a campaign that's called Let Children Live. This was launched by Amnesty International and Save the Children, and Churches for Middle East Peace is translating these marketing materials and joining in this campaign to make it relevant for Christians and churches. Let the little children live. Matthew 19:14, Jesus said, let the children come to me. And so we're inviting individuals, small groups, churches to join in the Let Children Live campaign, share this on social media, have your church endorse the event. That means you will get the name of a child that is in Gaza or the West Bank that is alive to pray for and to support and to elevate the stories that people in the West Bank and Gaza are experiencing. 2 million children live in the occupied Palestinian territories, every one of them beloved by God. So we'd invite you to join us in that Let Children Live campaign. We desire for Israeli children and Palestinian children, all children in the Middle East and in the world, to be able to live without fear of being killed by bombs or dying of starvation. And so we invite you to join us in that call. May God go before us in the name of Christ. Amen.